Very good morning to you, viewers, to another episode of NK's Lockdown Musics. Oh, just a second, 1 second. The fan was on, so. Welcome, friends, to another episode of NK's Lockdown Musings. Now, we are all in lockdown, and the lockdown is likely to end on the 14th, but I guess the latest information is that the red zones in Karnataka, they might be extended. And Mangalore is one of the red zones. Of course, there are other red zones across the country. And it will have to be extended because, from what I read, the lockdown is the only way to stop the spread of the virus.
Right.
Now, given that situation, a lot of people are working from home. Businesses and manufacturing industry has closed down. They will have to revive once the lockdown lifts, especially in the rest of the country. And it has to be lifted as early as possible so that the economy can revive. Now, what happens after the lockdown is lifted? That is going to be in the case of businesses and in the case of the people that they employ. Now, that is the focus of our discussion today. And I'm privileged to have with me Ramesh Ranjan, one of the most experienced HR persons in the world. He has got 35 years of experience in the area of human resource management, and he last worked as the VP HR at Schneider Electric. Earlier, he has worked with many multinationals, and he was my colleague at ITI when we first started. And that's how I know him, and we have kept in touch over the years. He teaches at many business schools in Bangalore and was also an associate for NASSCOM when they set up their Leadership Resource Center. So he has got wide experience, and he is very knowledgeable because right now in his second innings, like me, perhaps, he's the editor and the founder of humanengineers.com. It's one of the top HR blogs in the world. So a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, and he's just the right person to tell us what is let us start with first, Ramesh, what is going to be the business outlook post-lockdown? I think let's start there.
First of all, Brian, thank you so much for inviting me on News Karnataka, and it's my privilege and pleasure. And also pleasure to be talking to my old colleague of ITI. Yes, no one really knows what the outlook or how it's going to pan out in the long term, as well as in the short term. These are tough times for the nation, the society, and the business. I think how responsibly we behave in the next few weeks is going to decide the long-term interests of the business, the society, and the country. The faster we try and rush back to normalcy, I think we'll have to pay a heavier price. And the slower that we take to return to normalcy, I think the containment will be much faster, and the damage to the economy, to the society, and to the country will be much better. Please remember that economy can be revived, money can be regained, but lost lives can never be brought back. So therefore, it's very, very imperative that we adopt a cautious wait and watch policy, gradually ramp up businesses to normalcy rather than trying and rush into the risky proposition of getting back to normalcy as quickly as possible to tide over financial losses.
Okay, now there will be losses and business will struggle to get back on their feet. That's a given. Of course, the government has tried to help with a moratorium on loans and certain other inputs, especially tax filings and all that. But I think that's just not enough. Perhaps some waivers of interest on loans, because any moratorium means you've got to pay more after some time. But that's not the focus of our discussion today. Today, we find that there are two classes of workers: those who can work from home,
right,
and those who cannot work from home, and therefore are unemployed at the moment. Most of those people, that's around 37% of the labor force, is migrant labor, and they have migrated with great difficulty, even walking back to their homes in the rest of the country. Once businesses get back onto their feet, should it be a focus on profits or people? That is the question I'd like to ask you.
I think every organization, business, and HR leader proclaims that people are the greatest assets and their only competitive advantage. But when faced with a financial crisis like what we have before us today, the first liability is people in any organization. And I think this period, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, is a true test of a character and leadership. Organizations that adopt a people-first strategy, where they put people interests over business interests, are likely to survive in the long term, retain their reputation, and win the loyalty of employees. Yes, there will be compulsions to regain lost businesses as early as possible, but then it can't be at the expense of people interest. And I think it's very, very imperative, as Joe's version said, that whatever happens, the right response should be people first.
People first. That is it's a very popular jargon for the HR professional, and I've been one, and I've been one myself. The question is, how do you apply it when the money is dwindling, or the money is not coming in? Not coming in. Let me put it that way.
Right. So I think I'll give you a few step by step. I think once we decide to open up, we should, as I said, ramp it up gradually. Second, I think we should reduce the number of exposure of people to the mass congregation of people. Because as we all know, that the only solution that we all know at this point of time is social distancing and no touch. So the largest mass congregation happens in corporate world, in business world, or in factories. So we should try as far as possible to encourage people to work from home wherever it is possible and as long as it's possible. But for those who are required to come to work, be it in offices, be it in factories, I think we need to be a little more responsible over here. We need to ensure that the human distancing and no touch starts with your transportation of people, with your office setup, with your canteens, where people largely congregate, and therefore the risk of the pandemic reviving is high. So first step is that. Second, I think we should all ensure that nobody's leave or pay is cut for the period in which we had a lockdown. Third, I think many companies are now started adopting a pledge of no layoffs for the next 90 days. And I mean it, including your contractors and service providers. Many times what happens is corporates take care of their full-time employees, but then it comes at the expense of contract employees and service providers. And I think if you're a responsible organization who believes in people first, not only for themselves, but also for the society, I think they must adopt an equal policy for the contract laborers and the service providers who are also supporting them in their day-to-day business. And third, I think if a situation demands in the future that the financial losses are far more than they can cope up with, first, I think they should try and dig into the reserves. If you go by the money control report, which was published about 9 months back, more than 50 organizations in this country are sitting on pile of cash. They said more than ₹1 trillion are available in a pile of cash. Organizations must dig into their reserves. Otherwise, they should look at a pay cut, which I think the government of India itself has started with the ministers, the prime minister, the presidents of themselves taken a 30% pay cut. So maybe a gradual pay cut with the higher echelons of the organization taking a higher pay cut down to say about 10% of the lowest at the bottom of the pyramid. So these are some of the measures we should take. But I think creating hotspots, identifying the people who are likely to be affected, alienating them and socially distancing them would be the immediate challenge. And that's where I think organizations need to work. But as I said earlier, not at the cost of hitting people's lives. And if they can at least support them for the next 90 days without layoffs, without pay cuts, I think half the battle is won.
I agree with you. No layoffs, no pay cuts if possible. I think there will be some, I think even in Dubai or in the UAE, I just read an article saying that the government has authorized such pay cuts at least for the next 6 months or so. The issue is more than that. When you're talking about social distancing, when you get back to work and in factories and in the transportation sector, it all involves an additional expense. So that will have to be financed. There was a suggestion that was doing the rounds. I don't know your reaction on that. There was a suggestion that was doing the rounds that the government can do much more. For instance, it can waive interest on loans. It can reduce the employer or waive off the employer contribution on the ESI. It can waive off the employer contribution.
Employer contribution.
Yeah, the employee contribution obviously will be on his pay. The employer contribution on the PF, which is already adding to the cost of the, you're keeping your employee back on the rolls, right? And you're probably cutting their pay, right? So
right.
The employer still has to bear all the expenses. So some of these expenses, like the interest costs, these additional contributions to Social Security, perhaps can be waived off by the government or can be absorbed by the government. And that would be actually, because everything is on record and they will know exactly what the financial implications are. So obviously they can take a call on all these things. They have already deferred the filings, the tax filings. There is also, they have also suggested that GST, the refunds can be looked at in a different way. So there are many things that the government can do, and perhaps if they do that, the easing of the business into the mainstream as it gets back on its feet, I think will be much easier. What other implications do you see when a person, I'm now looking at the individual aspects. The other day we did a lockdown survey. I don't know whether you have read it, but one of the things that came out from the survey was when we asked about mental health. One of the main things that people said was, I'm not sure how I'm going to get back to the office. I'm so used to staying at home. Now, how do I get back to the office? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, I published an article in your own newsletter where I've said that work from home may become the new normal, right? One is, of course, from an employee perspective. And also I see from an employer's perspective, especially in the context of what you just said, how does organizations conserve costs? How does organization generate that additional cost to meet the losses of business? I think, do we really require lakhs of people congregating in offices? And now I think 21 days has shown us that we can still sustain business running from home. So organizations might have to relook at whether this policy of working from home or remote working can become the new normal, at least for a sizable portion of their workforce. Yes, of course, it is going to take time. As they said, that 21 days becomes a habit, and therefore to change a habit requires another 21 days. But I think slowly people will realize that they have to return back to normalcy, and this can't become a permanent feature in their life.
My only concern right now is how the economy will take care of itself once we are able to control the bell curve of the COVID-19. That is, I think, one of the major concerns, because everything right now is at a stop, and people still have to maintain those overheads that they are already facing. And with the global economy, especially on a downswing, except now the China's economy is reviving, but even China exports hell of a lot of what it produces, and they cannot export it to anywhere because there's nobody there to buy. So it's quite a dicey situation. But I think, like all other situations, the world will come out of it because resilience of people is very high. And and so let's hope for the best. I think at this point we'll wind up, and thank you very much for joining me, Ramesh. and we'll have more interesting conversations as we go along. Thanks a lot for joining me virtually on the news at the News Karnataka studios. It's a virtual studio for us. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian, and it's been my pleasure. And look forward to more such interesting discussions in the future. And wish you all the very best.
Thank you, Ramesh.